Florida is a pretty great place. It's sun, it's sand, it's no wonder that people like to live there. And maybe there's some that continue to live there, even after the living part of their life is over. Let's take a look at 5 creepy and maybe haunted places in Florida. Pinewood Cemetery. Pinewood Cemetery began as a simple 1-acre plot where early South Floridians buried their dead. Officially, 200 souls were said to be interred, but local knowledge claims that many more unknowns are entombed on the grounds. As one might expect, there are plenty of tragic tales to be found among the tombstones, like that of Dora Suggs. Dora left her home and 2 children one December day in 1905, never to be seen alive again. She was found, raped and beaten to death, in an area known as the Devil's Den. A man named Edward Brown was convicted of her murder and hanged in 1906. Residents living around the cemetery report shadows and dark figures moving about at night. It can be a creepy, yet beautiful place. The Cuban Club. The Cuban Club in Tampa Bay was built in the early 1900s as a gathering place for the Cuban community, and it became just that. Yet with 100 years of history under its roof, there have been some dark moments as well. In the 1920s, an actor was performing at the club when, distraught over something, he committed suicide on stage. With a death so dramatic and tragic, it's no wonder that his spirit is said to linger. Another story is that of 2 Cuban Club board members who found themselves locked in a heated argument. So heated, in fact, that one board member pulled out a pistol and shot the other in the face. The murdered man still haunts the club, perhaps out of shock and disbelief over his violent and sudden death. Other ghosts, such as a beautiful woman in a white dress and red heels, because there's always a woman in a white dress, and a child playing near the pool, have been reported as well, making the Cuban Club one of the most haunted places in Florida. The Riddle House. The Riddle House in West Palm Beach is the kind of place where you'd expect to find hauntings. I mean, the place was a funeral home for a time. Yet this building's past is dark, even by funeral home standards. The Riddle House was built in 1905 as a home for the overseers of the nearby Woodlawn Cemetery. Grave robbing was a common thing back then, so the residents of the Riddle House were there to keep an eye out for shenanigans. One of the cemetery workers, a man named Buck, was killed during a fight in town. Ever the dedicated employee, his ghost is seen walking the cemetery grounds and around the Riddle House. Another employee hanged himself in the attic. It was said that the employee had been experiencing financial troubles and, desperate and despairing, decided to end it all. His death began a series of frightening happenings, including voices in the attic and a torso that hangs from the ceiling. People sometimes think it's a mannequin, but are shocked to learn that there are no mannequins in the attic. Fort Matanzas. The horror of Fort Matanzas begins long before any buildings were even built. Around 1565, French Huguenots set out on a mission to attack a nearby Spanish settlement. A storm shipwrecked the 245 Huguenots on the beach of what would become Fort Matanzas. Discovered by the Spanish, the stranded and starving men were given a choice: surrender, give up their Protestant faith, and convert to Catholicism, or die. The men surrendered, but they refused to convert, so the Spanish slaughtered all of them. Eventually a wooden, then a stone fort was constructed near the site of the massacre on what is today known as Rattlesnake Island. You can visit the fort, as it's now a national monument, but you have to either swim or take the ferry. Locals talk about strange lights floating around the fort at night. The sand of the island near the place of the Huguenots' massacre turns blood red for no rational reason. And apparitions of soldiers in their uniforms are said to wander the fort's grounds. Perhaps a few of the doomed Huguenots who lost their lives so many years ago. The Old Jail. The aptly named Old Jail in St. Augustine was home to the worst of the worst during its working life from 1891 to 1953. Both men and women prisoners were incarcerated there, with the sheriff and his family living just across the hall from the cells. For some, the old jail wasn't just a place to be held, it was their last stop as they met the end of a rope on the jail's gallows. Conditions at the jail were notoriously harsh. Prisoners were crammed into small cells, often without plumbing. And you worked, and worked hard, while you were locked up. Men worked in the fields and the women cooked and cleaned, becoming something like prison maids during their stay. It's estimated that a prisoner's life expectancy in the old jail was around 2 years. Whether it was disease, violence, or execution, a lot of people met their end there, many of them unknown to this day. One of the most infamous guests of the old jail was a man named Sim Jackson. He was hanged in 1908 for murdering his wife. He nearly cut the poor woman's head off with a straight razor. With people like Sim in the old jail's history, it's no wonder that ghosts are doomed to remain in this hell on earth. You can visit the jail, and visitors have reported seeing shadows move in the corners. Some have even said they've been grabbed by unseen hands, to the point where they've been left with bruises. There is also the Crawler, a terrifying apparition that crawls along the floors, stalking the living.